On my 60th birthday, there were no happy parties or well wishes, just pandemonium. My husband, Robert, considered me a bother, and my son, Daniel, only cared about money. My son had given me dish gloves, but he had given his mil jewels instead. When I finally said, I want a divorce, they laughed and said, "You're 60, Mom, no savings, no retirement fund, where could you possibly go?" Because they didn't even bother to save me a bite of the cake I had made myself. They assumed I would give in, but in the end, not only did I divorce Robert, but I started a new life with my best friend, Liz, claiming what was rightfully mine. I traveled, made short videos, and suddenly became well known online, earning more money than they had in a lifetime. Robert, who once thought I couldn't live without him, ended up sick and alone, and Daniel, my son, who had shown me nothing. However, he was unimpressed when he learned how much I was earning, and by that point, all he could do was regret it. They said that I would come to regret my choice, but here I am, standing on the side of the road with the sun warm on my face. And the wind blowing through my hair, carrying only Freedom 60, so what is my life? I sat quietly on the couch, looking at the mess all around me, broken dishes, toppled chairs, pieces of the birthday cake I had painstakingly made, and Daniel stood in front of me, fuming. "Is it just the beginning, Mom? You're 60. Why are you discussing divorce? Can't you just live out the rest of your life in peace? What will Emily's family think of me if you divorce, Dad?" I was gone for 7 hours today, and neither my husband nor my son called to see how I was doing. The cold, in the bitter December wind of San Francisco, made my coatless body shiver, and when I returned, I was met with worry and only blamed my mother, whom I had fled from. "Dad and I ate the food you prepared at home during a pointless birthday celebration, didn't we? What more do you want?" Robert Rose's voice was brimming with contempt, "And you finally realized you had nowhere else to go, so you quit standing around and cleaned up this mess, leaving your shoes all over the place and making it filthy. You've ruined my entire damn life." When I stared at him that day, my fingers unconsciously tightened on the hem of my sweater. They didn't care that it was my birthday, that I had spent hours wandering the icy streets, or that I had asked if I was okay. They didn't give a damn about anything. I took a long breath and spoke in a calm, steadfast voice, "I want a divorce." His demeanor changed instantly, his eyes sparkling with incredulity, and Robert sprung up from his seat, jabbing a Daniel snorted, "Yeah, Mom, I just started working, I can't." He pointed at me, his face contorted in anger. "Divorce is fine. But where the hell do you think you're going to go? You're 60, have no savings, and have no pension. How are you going to survive without me?" he asked. "You don't need to worry about me, I'll be fine. I simply want to end our 30 years of marriage, my job, every cent under Robert's control, and every word." Yesterday, I might have shut myself in the bathroom and cried in silence, but today I just felt numb. I would have swallowed the anguish and told myself to bear it, but tonight I just looked into his eyes. "If it weren't for me, you would be homeless, look at yourself, and be unable to even cook properly. An elderly woman like you would only desire me." Unmoved and mute, Robert hadn't anticipated my lack of response. His rage briefly stuck in his throat before he collapsed back onto the couch, his face black with frustration. Daniel still didn't get. "Mom, is a birthday really worth all of this?" I stared down at the broken remnants of my birthday cake. Was it truly about the birthday, perhaps, but it was also so much more than that last week, Daniel? He sighed and rubbed his temples. "Well, how about I throw you a party tomorrow?" he asked. I couldn't believe it after 60 years when he abruptly told me that he wanted to throw me a birthday party. It was the first time someone had ever suggested a birthday celebration, and I was so excited that I couldn't sleep for days. I started looking up recipes 3 days in advance to make. When my best friend Liz learned about it, she called me in a confused tone, "Wait, you're cooking the food yourself for your own birthday party?" I couldn't help but laugh. Should I ask Robert and Daniel to cook? Those two have never set foot in the kitchen, so if I relied on them, it would be a huge letdown. We're not as wealthy as you guys. Daniel is getting married soon, everything costs money, and I'm a 60-year-old woman. Liz wouldn't let it go, so why not eat out? What kind of birthday person has to cook for themselves? I didn't need to celebrate by going to a fancy restaurant. But Liz offered to cover everything right away so I could enjoy the day. I kept saying no, and it took some persuasion before she finally agreed. To be honest, I didn't care how the birthday was observed as long as they remembered me. I would be content. This was the Daniel had planned my first genuine birthday in 60 years, and I was so excited that I couldn't sleep at 4:30. I got up to begin getting ready, moving carefully so as not to disturb Robert, but he still roused, angry and glaring at me. "Did I wake you?" I questioned. After over 30 years of marriage, I was a little embarrassed but still hopeful. I had hoped that when he opened his eyes, he would say, "Happy birthday," to me, but instead he simply turned over and muttered idly, "Why are you making a fuss so early? If you're not going to sleep, at least let someone else sleep." I was shocked, froze for a few seconds, and then said nothing because it was my birthday and I didn't want to argue. I tried to get over my disappointment and went to the store to buy Daniel's favorite steak and potatoes. I worked non-stop from the morning until noon, turning the house into a warm and orderly space by 11. Daniel eventually came home, and as soon as I heard the door unlock, I hurried to meet him. I was wondering if he would have brought a gift to say, "Happy birthday, Mom," but his hands were empty just a day before. On social media, he shared multiple pictures of earrings and asked in the comments, "Which pair do you think would be good for Mom?" My smile stopped, and Daniel saw my reaction and wrinkled his brows. "What's wrong, Mom? You seem delighted to see your son. When I saw you asking people yesterday which earrings would be best for Mom," he actually laughed. "Mom, you didn't think the earrings were for you, did you?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Of course, I'm happy, why wouldn't I be? In addition to Emily's mom's lovely jewelry, which looks better on her, I'm going to give them to her mother tomorrow." I froze that gift because it wasn't even for me. He went on, "Mom, you've always been frugal, so you don't need stuff like this." I looked down at the sink where I was washing vegetables, and the water mirrored a face full of wrinkles and sagging skin. He paused, then continued, "Maybe I should get you some dishwashing gloves instead." He seemed to sincerely believe that I didn't deserve a bouquet of flowers. Daniel's favorite appetizers were steak, roasted vegetables, and even a large pot of New York stew. I had spent the entire day preparing a birthday feast, 8 dishes total, with more and more white hairs woven into my hair and my son's eyes. I was nothing like Emily's mother, and I didn't deserve a thoughtful gift. As Robert walked by the kitchen, he looked at the table and sneered, "Is all this really necessary?" It's just a birthday, so I ignored the New England clam chowder I had meticulously learned to make specifically for the occasion. I had even researched plating techniques to make sure everything looked flawless. He and I continued working because this was my first real birthday, and I wanted it to be something to remember. By the time I put the last dish on the table and cleaned my hands of the flour, I was getting excited and picked up the little cake I had made for myself, ready to finally sit down and savor the moment, but I froze at the table because it was almost time to do so. My heart grew cold as I turned to face Robert and saw the same expression. Daniel looked at the cake in my hands and scowled, saying, "Mom, that's all you spent all this time on, and this is all you made for yourself?" The food I had spent all morning preparing had been eaten, leaving nothing but garbage. I tried to joke that this was supposed to be my celebration, but the birthday girl hasn't even sat down, and you two have already stuffed yourselves full. He had a look of impatience on his face, but this was my birthday, my first real birthday, and I wanted to at least look back on it and remember something happy. Believed it to be a casual comment, but Robert's face darkened instantly. He slammed his fork down on the table and glared at me. "What the hell is that supposed to mean, that Daniel rarely comes home, and now you're telling him not to eat?" I was shocked, so I tried to clarify right away. Joking, but Robert's voice only got louder, his tone brimming with rage. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out helplessly. Robert was 60 years old, and he was still talking without thinking. How can someone be this stupid their entire damn life? I lowered my gaze to Daniel, who merely waved a hand dismissively, saying, "Forget it, Dad. It's Mom's birthday. Let's not argue." Robert fell into an uncomfortable silence, his expression still icy, with the only sound remaining in the room being the clinking of utensils against plates. I picked up my fork to try to bite into my cake, but Daniel interrupted me again, saying, "Where's that emerald bracelet that Grandma left you?" I stopped, my hand trembling a little around the fork, and Daniel's eyes met mine with a sense of urgency. I've searched for it. Daniel didn't notice my expression, but his excitement only increased. "Mom, do you even realize how much emeralds are worth right now? Their market price has skyrocketed if I sell." I tried a few times but couldn't find it. "Bring it out, Mom. That thing's valuable, it'll sell for a good price. That bracelet, and you and Dad contribute a little more, I can finally purchase a home. Emily's family has been putting pressure on me to do so, and once I do, we can get married." He smiled, his eyes shining with calculation. "Her parents are professors, and her mother is wealthy. I need to prove to them that I'm paying attention." Talking absently while my fork stabbed at my cake, causing the once perfectly shaped slice to break into bits, every word he said was motivated by entitlement and avarice. I hardly recognized him, so I raised my head and asked him softly, "Don't come." "Mom, how could you say that I came all this way to celebrate with you, and now you're questioning my intentions?" "I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't in a difficult situation." Robert laughed quietly from the side. "Helen, you're his mother, so what's the point?" Daniel's smile faltered for a second. "It wasn't about the bracelet, it was about the person who gave it to me. The bracelet was the only gift I had ever received in my life, and I was born into a family that saw daughters as nothing more than burdens. Instead of hoarding things, shouldn't you help your son? Why are you being so selfish? The only reason I survived was because my grandmother would covertly ration her food and give it to me when no one else was around. The night before she died, she must have sensed something because she pulled me aside and led me up to the attic, where she extracted a used cloth pouch from her weak, trembling hands. Was the only person who had ever really cared for me before. I married Robert. She murmured, no one in this family will ever truly have your back. Hide this. One day you'll need it, and slipped a vintage gold bracelet set with an emerald into my palm. And I realized I had nothing in this house, so I hid the bracelet in the kitchen, deep in a flour tin. No one else ever entered the kitchen until today, when I stared at Daniel and said, "How did you find out about the bracelet?" in a barely audible whisper. He shrugged nonchalantly, as if it were nothing. I had seen your chat history. His tone was light, even with a hint of mockery, as he said, so casually on your phone, as if it were his right to search through my personal belongings. Mom, what are you hiding? What's between you and Dad that you can't talk about? Do you even care about this family? My heart fell, and my eyes started to sting with the threat of tears. I spoke slowly and forcefully. To appear composed, I handed the bracelet to a friend to confirm that it wasn't a lie. I had spoken to Liz about it. Suddenly, Daniel's expression darkened, his hands clenched, and he abruptly snatched a cup from the table and tossed it violently to the ground. What do you think? When I put the fork down, I said unequivocally, you don't want to give it to me. Yes, the bracelet was gone, but more significantly, I didn't want to give it to him for the first time at the age of 35. Fury took over, flipping the entire table in the process. He yelled, I treat you like a mother, and you treat me like this. I didn't answer, my world was spinning, and all I could see was the wreckage. How and what? Robert's voice broke through the chaos as plates crashed, the cake splattered onto the floor, and the tablecloth was soaked with wine. I shouldn't have returned to celebrate your birthday. Daniel swiftly followed up with a threat, saying, just tell me yes or no. Think carefully, I need this money now. If you don't help me today, when you're old, don't expect me to take care of you, and I won't give you a single cent, Robert. Could you really need to spend money on a cheap bracelet? I didn't have a retirement fund when I married Robert, and he told me that I didn't need to work. I'd take care of you, just manage the house and take care of the kids. Did you hear that poor old woman without retirement savings dared to argue with her son? They spoke as though it were true, but was it true? I foolishly believed it was a promise, but now I had no pension, no savings, and I might even lose the right to receive Robert's Social Security benefits when he retired. Every time we argued, he would cruelly make fun of me. If it weren't for me, you would be a beggar by now, starving on the streets, and if I dared to speak up, he'd always react in a cold, cruel manner. And women like you who stay at home to cook and wash clothes are everywhere. I could easily trade you in for a younger woman. What man would want you to raise a son after a divorce if you don't take care of him? Your son still needs to go to school, so I endured until my son left for college, and then I decided to look for a job when I turned 40. However, a 40-year-old woman could only do dishwashing at a restaurant, and the pay was pitiful. But I accepted it because I wanted my own insurance and a sense of security. I had always yearned for a retirement fund similar to Robert's stable Social Security. I began saving in order to open an IRA and put some money aside for retirement because I wanted security income so I wouldn't have to rely on anyone else. However, just as I had saved enough to open my account, Daniel called my mother and said, we're going on a trip before we graduate, and everyone is going, and I don't want to miss it. Can you help me with some money? I hesitated but told him the person on the other end of the line said, Mom, you're saving for retirement. I'm about to graduate, and when I get a job, I'll take care of you. You can spend as much as you want. I was touched. It wasn't about needing his money, but just knowing he cared at least a little, so I sent the following year. He called again and said, I'm thinking of going to law school, but the tuition's expensive. Can you help me out again? I hesitated. Again and sent him the money, telling myself that I'd save it for later. After all, there was still time, but every year there was something new to move to, a new city. He would always say, Mom, this is the last time, but there was never a last time. This year I turned 60. The restaurant had long since stopped hiring me to do the dishwashing, and young people worked faster and more efficiently than I did. I had long since missed my opportunity to save for a new certification to pay for a government job application. My eyes filled with tears as I looked down at my shabby shoes and realized that Daniel had completely forgotten the promise he made when he graduated that he would take care of me. All that was left was a cold, indifferent threat that I won't give you a single cent size too small, hurting my heels, and I had compromised all my life for them, making sacrifices that had never meant anything to them. I raised my head, and, for the first time in my life, I said out loud, I want a divorce, refused to continue living this way. Robert leaped out of his chair, his face flushed, and said, once more, you ungrateful old hag, I reprimanded you a little, and now you dare bring up divorce? Get the hell out of my house. Without hesitation, I turned and left, but where could I go? I had lived here my entire life, but as soon as I went outside, I realized that I had nothing in the world that was really mine, so I had to call Liz. This house was Robert, the bank accounts were in his name, and my credit card was an extension of his. I was about to call you, Helen. I'm getting a divorce, do you want to go with me? Liz and I met at a community college's senior education program. It was a new initiative, and the moment she heard my hoarse voice, she fell silent for a few seconds before letting out a soft sigh. The first few classes were free, and since I had hardly ever attended school, I was a little excited when I saw the course list for art appreciation, beginner French, and yoga. On the first day, I enrolled in a flower arrangement class, where the professor discussed visual harmony, balance, and flow, but I couldn't comprehend a word. I sat rigidly in my chair, terrified to touch the flowers in front of me for fear of ruining them. Liz, who was seated next to me, saw my uneasiness and patiently smiled while describing how to trim the stems and pair colors. She was as elegant as a movie heroine, and there wasn't a day after the trial period finished, Liz enrolled in several long-term courses. She looked my age, but she seemed to live in an entirely different world. She had a single wrinkle on her face, smelled slightly of jasmine, and had perfectly manicured nails. Those 3 days were the nicest I had experienced in years. However, I couldn't afford to enroll in any of them, so I didn't dare ask Robert. Because he would never let me waste money on something so pointless. Liz's life seemed ideal to me. She was a college professor who was financially independent, her husband was a corporate executive, and she had a loving, intelligent, even though her name sounded lovely, Elizabeth Sullivan. She told me that her mother named her after her favorite book, Elizabeth, a name that represented wisdom and strength. She never had to bow her head to anyone, clean the kitchen until her wrists hurt, or cry by herself in the middle of the night. My name was chosen at random the day I was born, so I was even more shocked when Liz abruptly announced that she was divorcing than when Robert threw me out of the house. When I got to the hotel that Liz had mentioned, I swore a lot of consoling words in my mind. That I nearly forgot my own heartbreak, but Liz's happy face greeted me as I opened the door. She was holding a small birthday cake with candles still flickering, and I froze. The cake was delicate and lovely, something I had only ever seen on TV shows about good-natured young girls. I couldn't contain my tears for their birthdays, and my nose started to burn. I threw myself into Liz's arms and sobbed violently for a long time before remembering to ask, wait, didn't you say you were getting a divorce? What happened, Liz? Michael's first love returned, and I discovered that they have been going out to dinner and movies together every week. She handed me a tissue while still appearing calm and relaxed. If she hadn't just told me about her divorce, I would have assumed that this was all part of a planned surprise. I had previously met Michael, and every time Liz and I finished our classes, he would come get her. In cold weather, he would bring her a jacket, and he always seemed like the ideal husband. I found it difficult to find the right words to reassure her about what had happened. He has been cheating. People often say that when a man cheats, all men are like this as long as he comes home, but when I was looking at Liz, I couldn't bring myself to say that. Instead, I blurted out, Michael is a piece of Lee, and laughed in surprise. I thought you were going to tell me that we should just put up with it at our age, so I scratched my head. If it had been anyone else, I might have made Liz raise an eyebrow, but after everything they've done to you, don't you want to go? I stared at the cake in front of me for a while without saying anything, and then I finally said, yes, I do. After 60 years. In contrast to Liz, my divorce was much easier, but Robert never thought I would actually leave. He thought I was just trying to get him to give up and lower his pride. Even when the court summons arrived at the house, he still roared with a red face. I was tired and wanted to live for myself for once. Liz pushed me to file for divorce earlier, but I never dared to, in part because I believed that at my age, you don't come crawling back begging for a reunion because I wouldn't take you back even if you did. Face a divorce, it's who's afraid. Of whom? Divorce would be embarrassing, in part because I had nowhere to go, no money, and not even a place to sleep. The house, bank accounts, and retirement fund belonged to Roberts, so I had nothing, and if I left, how would I survive? However, Les assured me I was mistaken. Patiently explained to Helen that even if he was the one earning the money, it was still marital property, and that I had the right to half of it. The words echoed in my mind like a thunderclap, and when the court started looking into our assets, I discovered that Robert had a lot more money in his safe than he ever disclosed. He had been keeping about $250,000 from me, but even while I took odd jobs to pay for groceries, he held tight to every dime. In the end, a fair ruling gave me $65,000, and it was the first time I felt valuable after that divorce. When the decree was in my hands, I felt as though 1,000 pounds had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer Robert's wife or the woman who couldn't even celebrate her own birthday. As I was leaving the courthouse, I saw Liz waiting at the entrance, and the young woman standing next to her was Emily. I stopped in my tracks and turned to face her. When Daniel's face lit up with delight, he hurried forward and almost grabbed Emily's hands in excitement. "You came for me, didn't you? You regret breaking up, right?" Emily said, frowning and yanking her hands away right away. "Come for you? Don't flatter yourself." Daniel froze. "After everything you lied about, you really thought I'd come racing back," and then all of a sudden everything clicked. Emily, whom Daniel had been lusting after all this time, was Liz's daughter. His happy smile faltered for a brief moment, and Emily's tone tightened with wrath. Daniel had lied to Emily about everything, including telling her he was 28 when he was actually 35, that he was a government employee when he didn't even have a real job, and that he had a villa when the house he lived in wasn't even his. They argued until the whole story was revealed. "I had always wondered, you really believe that I ended our relationship because your parents divorced? If you hadn't lied to me from the beginning, I wouldn't have even given you a second look. Why would a successful, well-educated woman like Emily ever fall for Daniel? I knew it was all based on lies." Emily's eyes burned with contempt. Daniel's face turned ugly. Shade of scarlet, clenching his teeth, and glaring at me. "You divorced, that fine, but why the hell did you have to ruin my chances too?" I asked him directly. "Do you even deserve marriage? If you hadn't lied, she wouldn't have gotten married." I turned away and headed closer to Liz Emily, who was standing next to her mother. She gave me a slight smile, and there was a glimmer of appreciation in her eyes. Daniel clenched his teeth, and his breath came in rapid huffs. He wanted to argue, but ultimately he was at a loss for words. Behind me, Daniel yelled, "As I'm your son, what do you think I'll do for you in the future? If you don't help me now, keep dreaming that Robert timed in coldly. That's exactly what you actually did. Emily looks down on me because I don't have money, but you just got $65,000 in the divorce, so you owe me at least some of it. Plan to spend the money on yourself because you believe it is yours." I hesitated, then slowly turned around to face them. Why shouldn't I spend it on myself? For 60 years, I had always put others before myself, but this time, I turned and left Robert's house behind me. I didn't turn around, I just kept walking, leaving him with nothing but my back. The first thing I did following my divorce was stroll into the Department of Public Works. His calmness was breaking. "Helen. Just wait and see. You'll regret this. The ending won't be good. Documents and request a name change." When I was born, my father had chosen the name Helen informally. He was as unremarkable as a name could be. Fading into the background, much like I had been as a child, with teachers always remembering me last at my younger brother's birthday celebrations, and I was always the one with trace. Helen was never the one being honored, she was a presence. So small that it was practically non-existent. However, I refused to remain invisible any longer because my marriage was finished and I was no longer a woman, a mother, or a man's shadow. I wanted to be myself, but when Lee learned that I was changing my name, she was even more thrilled than I was. She searched through history books to find the ideal name for me, and in the end, she chose Eleanor, which she said warmly, and smiled at me. Eleanor is a symbol of independence, intelligence, and perseverance. Your life begins today, Elias. Divorce wasn't going as well as mine, and even after she filed for divorce, her husband Michael refused to let her go. He stood in court and maintained that there had not been an irreparable breakdown in our marriage. I held the new ID in my hands and stared at the name printed on it. I am Eleanor. 2 weeks had gone by. I was concerned for her, but Lee didn't seem to mind at all. Instead, she spent her days contentedly looking through real estate listings from various cities, sending me dozens of links every morning, which state that if one party refuses a divorce, they must live apart for a year before the court can declare the marriage irretrievably broken. She only grinned in a way that suggested a life already lived, but it doesn't really matter to me because I've been to practically every city in the world. Tell me which city you like best, and I'll purchase a property there so we can live together. City in the US, so I went back to pack my belongings before completing the divorce. I didn't have much to take because everything that really belonged to me could fit in one suitcase, if that. However, as I went through the remnants of my life, I discovered something surprising, an old diary I had forgotten. I kept one, but as I was leafing through the yellowed pages, I found an entry from decades ago written in hopeful, careful handwriting. Michael came to propose today, and he told me he couldn't give me the wedding I wanted, but I told him it didn't matter, and I was just thankful that I could finally leave this house. I stopped and traced my fingers. I can't believe Michael is moving to California for work. I never imagined leaving this small town in my lifetime. I hope to see more of the world someday. The inked words indicate that my marriage had been an escape all along. Another entry shows slightly messy handwriting, as if I had been too excited to write properly. I flipped through the pages while sitting on the floor, experiencing a strange range of emotions. I had once genuinely wanted to wed Robert, and my greatest dream had been to travel and see the world outside of my small, stuffy town, but I had somehow forgotten everything about that night. Liz, my world has always been too small, and I don't want to settle down just yet. I spent the first half of my life in that small town, and even after moving to the city, my entire world still revolved around my husband and son. A few days later, Liz called me, her voice full of excitement, and I bought a camping. Liz was always ahead of the curve when we went on a road trip. She taught me how to record videos and chronicle our adventures, and she even assisted me in creating a social media account called The Runaway Diaries, where I posted daily updates about my new life. I never imagined that someone like me would be loved by you two or living the dream, and hundreds of young people have left comments on my videos. Meanwhile, I'm stuck in my soul-crushing work, and when I am 60, I want to be just like you. This is how life should be started at 60, and I'm so envious that I didn't always understand the slang they used, but I liked the phrase, starting life. Of course, not every restart went smoothly. For instance, Michael would not let go and would continue to watch our videos. Occasionally, he would send me flowers or even show up at our destination, standing outside our hotel, and sincerely apologizing, while swearing. After cutting off his first love and pleading with her for another chance, Liz didn't even look at him. Daniel then called me, but he never inquired about how I was doing. Instead, he said, "Mom, you must be making a lot of money from those videos, right?" Then came the so-called, "Dad's a mess without you." He forgets to Daniel wasn't wrong about anything, but even though I was making a lot of money a year ago, I never would have thought that I'd achieve financial freedom at 60. He took his blood pressure medication, and now he's paralyzed after having a stroke. What did that have to do with me? I hung up and blocked his number. Funny enough, I was driving across the country in an RV and earning more money than Robert had in his entire life after spending decades living like a servant and being reluctant to even buy myself a nice dress. If I had realized at the time that 60 was the true golden age of life, I would never have wasted my youth on them in every city we visited. Emily. One day, Liz's daughter would send us suggestions for local restaurants and places to explore when she had free time. She would even fly out to join us, or we would video call her while drinking coffee and talking about anything and everything. "I'm so glad you have such a great daughter, Liz." Through the screen, Emily smiled at me and said, "Don't be jealous, Eleanor. I'm your daughter too." I paused, then laughed, and a year later, Michael finally gave in to Liz's and Emily's strong demands, agreeing to the divorce that day as we stood outside the courthouse with Liz holding the final documents. She let out a deep breath as she abruptly turned to face me after letting go of decades of shackles and exclaimed, "Eleanor, I've decided I'm traveling overseas." I blinked, and she grinned. France was taken aback that he had met. I asked Liz if you were still holding on to Michael in France. Obviously didn't have a gentle gleam in her eyes when she shook her head. "But I still want to go back, and when I was younger, I spent years studying in France and met a lot of friends who are now all in their 60s. If I don't go now, too." Was thrilled for her even though I might not see them again. "I hope you have a great time and get back together with everyone you desire." Liz's sigh made me think you would be angry and accuse me of abandoning you. I smiled softly behind you, wondering how I could have learned from you. "You'll never be completely abandoned," she said, laughing, her eyes sparkling. "Perhaps you could come see me once. You fly to France to see an old friend after completing your road trip throughout the United States." Eleanor. Emily nods, "Maybe I will, then you'd better start learning French. There are plenty of Americans in France, so I don't need to, as long as I know how to gesture." Regardless, we exchanged glances and started laughing. Life is still new and exciting, and the trip goes on.